committee members join us. So welcome to our February Sustainability Advisory Committee meeting. Thanks for making the trek in the rain. We joked about this when we first came in, but it's, I guess, good luck that there's rain today since we will be talking about stormwater later. So briefly, here is our agenda. Today, we'll open up with our welcome, then have our public comment period. We'll have kind of our primary feature presentation on Metro's approach to sustainably managing stormwater. We will revisit the potential Sustainability Advisory Committee support areas that we generated during our conversation in November. And then we'll round things out with brief Metro updates, and the core focus of our updates today will be on what to expect based on what's happening at the federal level. Just as a reminder, we are recording our meeting today. So when you speak, just please press the bottom right-hand button so that the recording can pick up your audio. And then when you are finished, turn that button off. Try not to double tap. If you double tap, we may have to reset the system and restart recording. So with that, let's transition to our public comment period. Now I'd like to invite any members of the public who would like to give feedback or share public comment, please come forward.
Hello, my name is Clay Ezel. My name is Clay Ezel. I am an owner of the compost company. Just wanted to comment that I'm very happy to see stormwater management on the docket for today. That's an issue that is near and dear to our heart because some of the material that we make actually is part of stormwater management, the material, things like bioswales and things. Enforcement of the types of materials that go into that has been an ongoing issue for quite some time, so interested to hear about how that might look going forward, because with the further development, especially along the East Bank and things, that it becomes an issue of critical importance. So looking forward to hearing more on that front. Thank you for the work you're putting into it.
Thank you, Clay. Any other members of the public wish to provide comment? All right. We will move on. So our feature presentation this evening, we've got two incredible professionals from Metro Water Services with us today, Tom Palco and Rebecca Doan. And so if you all want to come forward and share with us all the wonderful things you're doing, I know this group is eager to hear. All right. Take it away.
Okay, awesome. So good evening, everybody. Like I say, I'm Tom Palco. I'm an engineer, and I've been with Metro Water Services I've been with Metro for going on 40 years now. So I've been in stormwater all the time. So I've seen a lot of rain. I've seen and the stormwater program has really grown. So when we put this presentation together, we kind of just pulled a bunch of stuff from a bunch of other different presentations. So you may see looks like there should have been something in front of that slide. There probably should have been, but we're trying to get just some slides out here so we can talk about some different issues that we hope that you'll be interested in. So here's kind of what the agenda I'm going to start with is I'm going to talk about the home buyout first. I'm going to talk about it a lot because it's something that I think is one of the best things we do. And in this picture here, you can see on the top slide, there's these tiny little houses that are literally on the banks of Gibson Creek. That's a named creek, and literally on top of it. And you can see the bottom photograph is what it looks like now. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. I'll talk a little bit about our master plan. I'll talk about our maintenance, and then we'll talk into stormwater regulations and urban forestry. So and please, if I say something that you have a question, just please stop me. I don't have a script. I'm just kind of winging it. So you're not going to get me off track because I'm probably never on track. So there you go. So the first question is, why would we want to do home buyout? For one thing, sometimes people say, oh, is that part of the home buyback program? It's not a buyback program because I never owned the houses to start with. So it's a case where we didn't have any regulations in Nashville until really 1979. And so we didn't have any flood maps until 1982. So if you live in Creve Hall, where I live, my house was built long before we had any floodplains mapped, before we knew any better. So there's a whole lot of houses essentially built in bad places. And today, those houses would not be able to be built because of regulations. If they were going to be built there, they would be much higher than they are. So we have a lot of houses out there that are just in a bad spot. And I can't make the water go away, so we're trying to make the house go away from the water to reduce those damages. So the first thing is that in order to be in FEMA's good graces, we have to worry about what happens during a flood. So if you have a house that is a non-conforming use, which means that in Nashville, you got to be 4 feet above the base flood elevation with your lowest floor. So if I've got a house that's not there and it gets damaged, FEMA wants to know how damaged it was. Was it 20% damage? Was it 50% damage? Was it over 50% damage? If it's over 50% damage, then that is substantially damaged according to FEMA, and I cannot allow that house to be built back as it was. So I've either got to take it down or I've got to make them elevate, and sometimes, again, and that's May 2010, that's a tough decision. That's a tough conversation you have with a homeowner sitting there with a substantially damaged house that they can't build back in that same location as it was. So we're able to offer a buyout, which got us through a lot of those. So then the conversation went, we're going to buy your house, pay you fair market value, and things are going to be good. So we're talking about that. And so it does, I'll just go through this real quick, but again, emergency response is another big thing. We have people living in areas that we know is a dangerous place to live. And if you have a house in the floodplain that's elevated where the house doesn't flood, you still have to come and go from that property. And most people that lose their lives in flood are in their vehicles, either going to or from their flood damaged properties. And again, I've got story after story. We could talk about that. But again, a house that I tear down will never flood again. That's the only thing that I can be sure of. So here's a prime example. This is a house on Delray Drive. Delray Drive is in West Nashville, and this is Richland Creek. And so this is a house that was built in the 1950s. It was originally like an 800 square foot house, very small house. But if you look at what the BFE is the base flood elevation according to FEMA. So this particular house, the lowest floor is a couple feet below that. You can see what happened in May 2010. In May 2010, it was all the way up there at 421. So this house, if it's substantially damaged, which you get 5 feet of water in it, when you got water on the fuse box panel in the hallway, that house is substantially damaged. So we would have to tell these folks, I'm sorry, you can't build back, you've got to elevate. And so when we apply our 4-foot freeboard, you can see where that new floor elevation would be. And if you can't imagine what that would look like, it would look like this. This is across the street. So we had the situation we had in 2010 is some folks stayed and took the buyout, and the ones that were not substantially damaged could build back. Others sold to a developer and got out, and this is a case of that. And the whole idea here is that it's just not practical to have a whole neighborhood of houses like this. And again, I've not eliminated all the risk of living there. I'm still, again, the first floor won't flood, but when it floods, water's going to be 6 feet deep, 5 feet deep underneath that lattice work. And so your lawnmowers, your tools, your whatever you have down there, and again, coming and going is going to be a problem. So, and then also in this particular case too, these houses were done. I mean, these houses were built in the 50s. They weren't insulated. They had lived their life, and it was time for them to move on. So there you go. So two things. So right now we're pretty much buying everything either through FEMA, through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, or 100% local funds. And with FEMA, it's always going to be on a voluntary basis, okay? FEMA will not come in and make people leave. So since we don't make people leave, we don't condemn, then we don't pay relocation. It's just a normal process. If you want, it's a willing seller, willing buyer. We offer fair market value, and off you go. But with FEMA, we must have a multi-hazard mitigation plan. You must have a plan in your county. And we have torn down houses. We have received grant funding in Nashville because of wildfires in East Tennessee, because the community that was in didn't have one of these plans in place. They couldn't get the money, and we said, we'll take it if it's still available. So it's very important that this plan be up to date. And right now, Heidi Mariscal at OEM we've got a schedule. This is going to be a major update this year. It's a five-year deal. So that plan will be done. So again, that's something that we've always had in place. We're always going to keep in place because you can't get the funding for these programs if you don't have that. With the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, it's not a grant. It's a partnership. So with them, let me go back for a second. So with FEMA, typically they pay 75% of the cost. We pay 25% of the cost. In May 2010, the local share was split between us and the state of Tennessee. So we were buying houses after 2010 for 12.5% of the total cost. It's a pretty good deal if you can get it. With the Corps of Engineer, it's a 65-35. So they still reimburse us for 65% of the work. But with them, they have to first do a feasibility study to see if there's a federal interest in doing this project. And so it's a very long process to go through, but once you go through it, there you go, you're ready to go. Okay, so with the FEMA projects, the easy place to start is a thing called repetitive loss properties. These are properties that have flooded, flood insurance claims paid, they repair the house, you go a couple years, it floods, rinse, repeat, it just keeps going over and again. If you look at this particular house here, on the very bottom line, it's hard to see. Each of those dates is a date of a flood loss. So this house had 9 flood losses from 1979, which is the first year we entered the program. It's like, the first year they got flooded and had a claim paid out. So the first year that flood insurance was available, this house got some damage fixed. So again, this house here, in 2003, you'll notice that there's nothing after 2003 because we bought the house in 2004 and tore it down. And if math goes the way it should, we avoided at least 7 or 8 other losses since 2004. So again, typically when these houses go through this cycle, they become rental properties. They become the houses on the street that are not kept up like the other houses, and it just kind of pulls down the rest of the neighborhood. So again, when we go in and offer fair market value, it's usually a great deal for the property owner. So again, this is an example of what I'm talking about. This is Wimpole Drive on Mill Creek. This is a famous area, and this area right now actually has a greenway trail on it because we went into the neighborhood over and over again. And when we're doing this, we're never going to get enough funding. We're never going to be able to get everything we want all at once. So we've got to be patient. Again, I've been here for 40 years. We were in this neighborhood several times between 2004 and 2009, buying 5 houses, or whatever. And then when 2010 hit, those last 2 holdouts said, "Hey, it's time. Can we be part of this?" And so those 2 houses are gone now too. Okay, so again, when you have an event like 2010, what am I going to do? There's so much got flooded. And so we had to say, okay, we probably had 11,000 houses across the county that had some flood damage. Not all of those were in the floodplain. Not all of those were whatever. So we had to say, what are we going to do? So we stick with residential because I can buy, back in 2010, I was buying houses for $100,000. I could buy one small business for $1 million, or I can buy 10 houses for the same $1 million. So we try to get the most bang for our buck. So we stick with residential. We stick with single family or duplex. We don't care if it's owner occupied or if it's rental, but again, we stick with those 2. The floodway is the area along the stream where today you can't put a building in there. So we would like to get those houses and take those out. And so that's another criteria. And then again, we look for the ones that were substantially damaged where they could not build it back the way it was before the flood. This is a big issue. Again, so I failed to mention that with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer projects, we have to show them that we have the ability to use condemnation. To date, we have not used condemnation. It's always been a willing seller because I've always got, whenever we go into an area, there's always people that say, "Hey, can I be part of that?" There's always more need and more want than there is money and desire. So at this point, we have never forcefully taken anybody's house. But again, with the Corps, we have to have it in there. But when we come down to it, though, there's a few houses that are on my list that I want to get before I retire because it's going to flood again. It's going to flood again. I know it is. It's just a matter of time. And we don't want to create what we've termed, I think we invented this term, the subsequent victim syndrome. We see a lot of this in 2010 where, again, a lot of times the developer will come in or the owner will come in and say, "I'm just trying to fix it back up so I can sell it and get out from underneath that," which means somebody from somebody anywhere else is going to come swooping into Nashville. "Look at this house. I can't believe the price. Look what I can buy." And they'll buy it not realizing what they've just bought. And here it is. Now I've got a new person to deal with, a new homeowner to deal with, and we like to try to stop that cycle whenever we can. Okay, so here's an example. So if you'll see here, the eight properties in green are houses that we bought and tore down. And the reason we bought them was because of the house that's still sitting there. There was a flood event in 2013 where, and again, this is the flood map, shows how bad it is in floodplain. But they went out and we had to go out and rescue a baby in a baby carrier off the front porch of this house because the water was surrounded that house, and they called the fire department. Like I said earlier, these guys will drive quickly towards the water and go. So this is a case where do we need to let this keep going? And so this is a case here that there's a couple other things. I'd like to be able to maybe to try to get an option on the property. So if they want to sell it, that I've got the first chance of getting. But there's a handful of houses like this across the county that I just think it'd be best for everybody if we pay fair market value and get them out of there. Okay, so here's where we are to date. Probably, again, this was not our money, but it's probably about $85 million have been invested in the 473 homes that we have bought and torn down. And again, I guarantee you that none of those homes will ever flood again. We also have some back tax properties that we also say grace over and maintain. We've had one mobile home park that was across the street from the fairgrounds. There was a mobile home park there that we took out and bought, and it's no longer there. Probably one of the worst. It's a flashy stream in the floodway. Probably the worst location in Davidson County for a mobile home park was that location, and it's a treed lot now. Thank you, Rebecca. And there's repetitive losses that we get from FEMA. There was like 222 buildings on there, that flood over and over again. We've removed 81 of those off that list, and we'll keep going back that list as money becomes available. We've also created 240 acres of open space, and we only mow 150 acres. And the way we mow them is that we pay Metro Parks Department employees on overtime to maintain these properties. We cut the grass every 2 weeks, but we don't mow to where the property owners used to mow. Typically, they would mow down. They'd take the mower and go all the way down to the creek. We don't do that. We set buffers back and create, we either replant or let it grow back naturally or a combination of. And then again, we've got 4 properties that have turned out to be nice greenways projects. So here's a couple examples. They're kind of hard to see. These are both on Richmond Creek. The one on the right, we've actually started going across the street now. And actually, the one on the right, it floods all the way over to the I guess that's Morrow Road. It floods all the way over there. So there's 4 layers, at least 4 layers of houses, 3 layers of houses that'll flood. And so we eventually will just hopefully keep moving through that neighborhood. And again, this is one on 7 Mile Creek that we've been active in here recently. Again, they're all meet those criteria of floodway. And this is one that I showed you earlier that showed where we have to go into the neighborhood sometimes several times to get it. But again, if you go out there today, you'll see a nice paved walking trail and a bridge across Mill Creek maintained by the Parks Department. It's very nice. And then this is another big one out on West Hamilton up on Whites Creek. So I kind of ran through that quick. Yes?
So one question, can you talk about timing? Because I've heard from one neighbor, you nicely helped me answer this question. Sorry. So if a neighbor 3 years later goes, oh shoot, I really wish I had done that, but that round of FEMA money has been spent, what's the timing to come back and re-offer that?
That's a good question. There's not one answer. So here's the way it goes. So with FEMA, what you have to do with FEMA is you have to put an application together and include everybody that you think you want to get and send it to FEMA. But they have to have a letter of interest from the property owner. So in May 20, and what FEMA is really good at is if there's 3 that flooded, 2 that didn't flood, 3 that flooded, 2 that didn't flood, they'll let us go and just get the whole block, okay? Because it gets, we don't want that kind of snaggletooth thing, whatever. But, you have to sign that letter of interest. So we struggle with folks saying, hey, we put this application together. We've got 40 houses. You're in the middle of it. Please, oh, please sign this. You could be walking into the closing and decide you don't want to take the offer and walk away. No hurt feelings. So that's with FEMA. So FEMA, you have to have a letter of interest. And with them, though, it goes, there's a certain timeline after the event where you have to have it done. And typically it's a 3-year, it's a 3 year. So if we get funding, and in fact, sometimes that's pretty quick, because we submit the application, it takes like 1.5 years for us to get the thumbs up, but our clock started when we submitted the application. So we've got 3 years. So that we got 3 years. With the Corps of Engineers, they select the properties. So with the Corps of Engineers, they use their Corps of Engineers way of doing things, and it's all about risk. It's not based on previous flooding. It's based on likelihood that it would flood in the future. And so with them, they establish what the list is, and then we get the project and off we go. Those projects have been going on for 5-6 years now, the ones we're doing, which is good. But what happens is that we run out of money before we get all the properties. And that's why, but with the Corps, we've also been able to go in and say, hey, we're at the end of the project. These people aren't interested. These people are. I've got one guy that wasn't on the list to start with, but it meets the same criteria. Can you work him in? And we've been able to we can work in up to 10% substitute properties. So it's kind of complicated, but again, whether you take it or not this time, we don't keep a list of naughty list or happy list, or whatever. We just say, if we get an opportunity to try again, we'll try again.
Right.
Yes.
I didn't see in your slides, but what happens to the parcels once you buy them? That might be a missing piece.
That's also a good question. It is perpetual open space. We cut the grass, and it is always going to be open space. With the federal programs, we must retain ownership. The Metro government must retain ownership. So some of them, we've actually showed the ownership as Metro Parks. If they put a greenway or a walking trail or a playground, it becomes ownership by Metro Parks. But otherwise, we just own it, and we maintain it, cut the grass, pick up trash that sometimes gets on there, and just keep it maintained.
Are there synergies there with park, planning out greenways? I saw 4 there. I'm just curious, what are the strategies?
Yes, the one on Park Terrace where that big, we dealt, again, it was Shane Dennison at that time, but we dealt with greenways and parks very closely on that one. And when we get, when we start gathering properties, we'll say, hey, look what we got, any interest in this for this or that? So, and we've had some of the properties over the past have become community gardens. Unfortunately, they kind of get excited and it goes for a couple of years, and then it kind of grows. So right now I've got one potential, but we like that. And when we do that, we don't charge anything. They cut the grass for us for the whole property. So I don't have to cut the grass, and they get to use it for, good purposes. So we encourage that. But yeah, that we must maintain ownership, and it's open space. Yes, so go around the room.
A quick reminder, folks, to turn on your microphone when you speak. That's okay.
Go ahead. We'll just go around them.
It strikes me that sort of with an ever-growing portfolio of properties that are being bought out, not only is there a growing annual maintenance cost for that, but also probably a loss in property taxes generated by the city from all of those sorts of properties. And it just kind of makes me wonder where the lines cross and how this is sustainable, like for generations to come or decades. And
we get this question a lot from smaller communities that are not growing like Nashville, where that would be a problem. But again, 473 houses, I've done that in 40 years. There's probably developers are probably tearing down 2,500 houses a year and rebuilding them. So as far as, houses being torn down and rebuilt, one house becoming 2 houses, 3 houses, that's going one direction, and we're taking these off the tax rolls. We understand that. But again, when you look at everything else, and again, what makes us more resilient in these areas, no one has come to me yet and said, man, you're killing me on my taxes by taking those out. Because again, we do have other costs associated with emergency services, and typically, when there's a flood, next day there's a pile of stuff out front that we got to go pick up. We got to just keep them up. And again, I think the properties that when they are not maintained, I think that pulls down the property values next door. So we've never done any analysis, but I don't lose any sleep over that. Yes.
It's the bottom right.
to
follow up on what you were saying, I was wondering, does new construction create new floodplains? I don't know if that's
No, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that when we get into the permitting thing. But no, the answer is no. Don't do that. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was really helpful. And I have a few questions, and maybe can save them for another time with Kendra if this is a priority for the office. But one is just a little bit more about, the projections. I know you said there was 80 or something out of the 220 repeat damage, but just what is the sort of community process around this? Obviously, it sounds like it is a series of like individual decisions, but I'm just curious around kind of community education or conversations about this program, what's been done, what's been thought about. I'm also curious in the sort of numbers that exist now, if you have sort of an assessment of the people who have chosen to participate in the buyout, just if there's any sort of demographic information around income levels, racial demographics, et cetera. And also if there's a way to know where people go. I think we know there's an affordable housing crisis, so when people take it, just what happens to the communities. And then lastly, just around policy frameworks that we've attempted in the city or thought about. I know you mentioned sort of like the people buying homes that are at risk and just whether that's disclosure laws or otherwise.
Okay, I'll try to hit all those.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess the demographics first thing. So typically, again, floodplain houses that have been flooded over and over again typically become in not a good repair, and those typically become lower income. Okay, and so we see it as the folks who have the least ability to recover after a major event. That's who's living in these houses. So again, it'd be hard for me if I lost everything, but it's harder for people with lower income to do the same thing. So we did a kind of a study here a while back on looking at the social vulnerability index of where we've bought, and pretty much like 80% of what we were buying was if you went on purpose to do that, I think we did great. But it was we didn't set out and say, it just works out that way because again, like I said, if I can buy 3 houses instead of 2, I'm buying the houses in these areas. So that's one thing. Where they go, I failed to mention with the Corps of Engineers, we do pay relocation. And so when we buy a house through the Corps of Engineers, they have to show us where they're moving to, and the Corps of Engineers has to actually go inspect that house to make sure it's safe and sanitary and sound, make sure that they're moving into a good house. And a lot of times that is out of county. A lot of times, and some it's out of state, some it's out of, but it's hard to find, a $350,000 house in Davidson County nowadays or whatever. So we do have some of that data. We've not really put it in a pie chart or anything and see where that is, but we do track that. And we do make sure that they're not moving into the floodplain somewhere else or moving to a house that's got all kinds of problems. So that's one thing that the Corps does. And again, the Corps they do pay relocation, and the Corps will actually also pay above fair market value. They do an assessment and say, okay, this is a $300,000 house. The nearest thing we can find is a $350,000 house. They will pay them $350,000. They will pay them a little bit extras so they can get a comparable house and stay within the community. So again, getting all the relocation expenses paid, getting that surcharge on the price is very, very helpful. How do we pick these houses, I guess? That's kind of sort of one of your questions. How do we engage the community? A lot of times with FEMA, it's typically related to a flood. I had a flood in Madison. We had a flood in Madison, and it's declared a disaster area, and they make money available, and there's a funding opportunity for us to go after. We like to try to go back into the area where the flood event happened, and we typically go in and we would have we'd get the council members and have a community meeting, and we'd say, hey, here's how much money we have, here's what we're going after, and have some community discussion about that. Other than that, I don't really have a full countywide master plan. Looking at the floodway is kind of, those mapped areas are all over the county. And I really can't tell you how many more houses we need to get until we're done. It just depends on how resilient you want to be. And, I can take this flood, I can take that flood. How big a flood can I take? But realistically, we've bought almost 500 houses now. If we bought another 700 or 800, then we wouldn't worry so much about houses flooding. But again, there's always some, and again, we have people sometimes come in, we'll be at a community meeting, I was at one, and guy raises his hand, he said, well, what about my house? I said, okay, your house is 2 streets over. Your house is 6 feet higher than this house. This house is, the floor elevation is 5 feet below the flood elevation. Your house is, 2 inches below the flood elevation. I'm gonna buy that house first. I am an engineer, and I'm gonna buy the worst first. And when you explained that, they're like, I said, does anyone here think that I'm not buying the right ones? They said, no, you're starting at the right spot. So that's what we do. We start at the worst and keep moving out. And again, we'll never be done. Did I miss any? I'm sure I might have missed.
That was really helpful, and I would love to, maybe continue the conversation with the commissioner, with Kendra, just around sort of the broader, like looking at outcomes and all of that sort of thing. But just the last question was any kind of pending or desired kind of policy frameworks around this program, like whether it's disclosure laws or otherwise that would.
I'm not sure I understand what you're.
Then maybe the answer could be no, but just around, like, I know in some jurisdictions, they have policies that require a certain amount of disclosure to new home buyers.
Oh, you're talking about when people coming in, what should they know?
The next survivor syndrome or whatever.
Yeah, and that gets kind of tricky sometimes, because if I owned the house and I rented it out and I did not live there, my disclosure is different than if I actually lived there and suffered through flood losses myself. Obviously, if I rented it out, I know that my tenants got flooded, so I do have that information, but am I compelled to tell it at closing? Maybe not. So there's some we don't really, there's nothing that we have on that, so we look at the real estate laws and practices to do that, but I can pull up a flood map on my phone in 5 minutes. I mean, we have our mapping system. If you go to, Nashville.gov, parcel viewer, we got floodplain layers. There's everything. We've got elevation certificates for the house. You can tell how high it is. So if the information is out there, it's readily available. And when people call us, I won't give them the answer. I'll say, okay, hey, are you at a computer? Go to this. I tell them where to go. So next time they can look it up. It is so easy to do. It is so easy to do and so easy to find it. And again, if you're buying a house, take that 5 minutes.
That was an excellent presentation, really informative, so thank you. You referenced a plan that you're required to have in place in order to get the FEMA support. Could you just tell us a little bit more about that plan? I'm particularly curious how often you update it and how you're reflecting new patterns of flooding, and also building, I think, on the point you made about how much of what you're doing is coordinating with parks, but also with our climate adaptation plan.
So the multi-hazard mitigation plan is available online, and I can't tell you where it is, but it's Emergency Operations OEM has that, and it is available. It has to be major updates every 5 years.
5 years.
And that plan has drought, it has all the hazards. It has human, natural, everything's in there. Everything's in there. I'm just worried about the flood part to make sure I've got what I need in there. But it is a plan that has to be. There's a process to put that plan together that FEMA says you must have public meetings, you must have a committee, and you must have this and that. And so it's a very detailed process to go through. We update it yearly, but again, this is a 5 years, so we'll be looking at making some major changes, and it'll be, I guess, end of this year is when it's due, I think. So.
And in your decades here, how much has it changed in terms of how many houses are in flood?
Yeah, so again, building new floodplains or building, again, I bought like 2 houses that were new houses, and they were in a sinkhole area that wasn't really a mapped floodplain from FEMA. So as far as, the problem is not getting any worse in my mind as far as houses that are in the floodplain. The floodplains have expanded a little bit.
That's my question.
The floodplains have expanded a little bit in different areas, and sometimes it's a foot here and a foot there. But again, if I've got a house that's 5 feet below the flood elevation, because it was built, decades ago, what's another foot, what's another couple inches? So it's kind of like, you know what I'm saying? Those houses are, yeah, it's a little worse. And we do try to update the flood maps periodically, and that's one thing. But again, they're not expanding like what you might think about, it's going from this to this to this to this. It's been kind of and a lot of the change in the flood maps has to do with the modeling capabilities and other things,
Right.
not necessarily development or more impervious surfaces or this or
Right.
that. It's just how
We had
they.
a former presentation from one of our last meetings about the East Bank and just working with the Corps of Engineers to try to figure out like what is the new scenario on flooding. So that's I was just interested and I do encourage if you aren't already, because so much of what you're doing helps with adaptation and resilience and parks. So
I don't think I can go into the East Bank. The East Bank is a whole new
just
thing.
steer
But
clear
yeah,
of
there's
that.
been the last 3 years, there's been a lot of work
yeah.
and conversation and analysis of
Yeah.
East Bank. So it is
Yeah.
it's that's another discussion for another day maybe.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm
Can I
going
ask
on.
just one more question?
Yes,
Sorry.
please.
Just a comment. Nashville's buyout program is nationally renowned as having, looking at the numbers, is remarkable. In North Carolina, we had about $150 million, and we were only able to buy 200 properties in the whole state of North Carolina. So just for context. So I was curious with that success, if you had gone after other pots of funding. You mentioned local funding, but CDBG, HUD funding, BRIC funding, HMGP funding. Just curious if that was part of the strategy.
Yeah, so most of the 2010 flood was HMGP, which is Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, which is through FEMA. They've got several different things, and there's a new program called BRIC, and we have not done anything through BRIC, which is where we need to go next. For a while there, it got difficult to do anything with FEMA because they had the threshold for the value of a house, the whole project was $385,000 to be pre-approved, pre-qualified. Otherwise, you'd have to do a benefit cost analysis, and it doesn't work. If you have a $400,000 house that's only had slight flooding here and here over several years, it's not going to work. So now they've raised that threshold to $750,000, I think. So now we're talking again about buying houses in this community, Nashville. So that's one thing. I don't know where else I was going, but that's.
And I guess you're just sitting tight to see what's happening on federal funding at all under any of these programs.
Yeah. The good thing that I've got going is if I've got a coworker who's an expert in doing this, and she knows how to put applications together. And in fact, she's actually helping East Tennessee put together some applications because of the flooding they recently had. It's just, and our thing is, we were successful after 2010 because we had done this before. I tell people that the time to learn how to do this process is not after a flood, it's today when it's nice and sunny. Every community has a handful of houses that they just wish would go away because they flood all the time. Those are the low-hanging fruit that FEMA's, if they've had flood insurance, I encourage people, get flood insurance. When you're flooded, file a claim, fix your house. If you get flooded, file a claim, take the money, fix your house. It's what you have to do. You have to play the game because that gets you on everybody's radar and saying, hey, the federal government, nationally speaking, there's 4% of the properties make up for 30% of the money that FEMA pays out. So if you do the math, if I get rid of my 4% and everybody else got rid of their 4%, FEMA's got a lot more money all of a sudden. So that's why we've always keep with that repetitive loss properties, because it's a no-brainer.
And if the repetitive loss and they don't have insurance, they wouldn't qualify for a buyout program.
If they don't have flood
don't
insurance, now there are with FEMA, HMGP, you don't have to have flood insurance. There are CDBG money, whatever. We did use in 2010, we used some of that money to meet our local match, but those were only certain areas that there was an income level and the houses of a certain value. But we did use some of that money to meet our local match. But there are different programs in FEMA where, some of them you have to have flood insurance, some of them you don't have to, so and again, I hope I'm up here next time talking about BRIC and how we got a bunch of money to buy houses through BRIC, because that's the next place to go.
And hopefully there's still a FEMA.
Thank you, please. At least for a couple more years. Get me, I need to buy a few more. Okay, we're gonna move on. Okay, so now we're gonna change to go into like neighborhood stormwater projects, okay? So, everything we do in stormwater is funded through the stormwater user fee that is charged to every single property in Davidson County that has impervious surfaces on it. If you're a church, you pay it. If you're a business, you pay it. If you're a homeowner, you pay it. And so for homeowners, it's $6, $13, or whatever. It's a fairly small amount. But that money comes to us, and that's the way we fund everything we do. It funds our capital program, includes our employees, our equipment. Everything we do is funded through that stormwater user fee. So pay your stormwater user fee. We need the money. So when we started the program back in 2009 is when those bills first went out. And then to 2017, Metro Council said, hey, we like what you're doing. We want you to do more of it. We're going to raise those rates and bring in $35 million. We started off at $14 million in 2009. Now we're bringing $35 million, and my job is to spend all that money wisely every year. So everything funds that. So we've had like kind of a backlog of projects in our mind, but it wasn't really organized. And so about a year and a half ago, we started a countywide master plan. And so what we first had to do is go in there and update the GIS layer of where our pipes and ditches are and what kind of capacity they can handle and where's the bad ones, where's the really bad ones, where's the ones that are non-existent. And so we started going through the county to do that. We've probably got another couple more years until we're finished. But here's where we started. So what we did was we took drainage complaints, we took infill development, and we took grading permits and kind of laid that on top of each other and say, where's all the pressures? And so we started in East Nashville, the Nations area. That was where all this stuff was coming to terms. And so those areas we started. The red areas of satellite is a combined sewer area, which there's another master plan that's already completed for the combined sewer area that's been done by the water and sewer folks. We finished the blue so far. So what we did, we put together an advisory committee, and this advisory committee is helping us make some determinations on what's important. When we go into neighborhood and say, I want to fix your drainage problem, and another neighbor says, well, what about ours? We wanted some basis of who's on first, which one is more, critical or whatever else. So this is the group we put together. And so one of the things we looked at is, what could we consider? If I'm going to go build a stormwater project, what could I consider? And there's 5 major things there in red, and then each of those have other factors too. There's social considerations, schedule, economics, flood reduction benefits, environmental impacts. Well, obviously, flood reduction benefits, that's what I'm all about, so it better be that. So we kind of had a lot of conversation about this, and we went through some kind of sophisticated and complicated scoring system, and what we boiled down to was that these are really the top 6 criteria that are going to make the difference of whether we do this project versus that project. And so what the master plan is, it's going into these areas, it's updating the inventory, it's coming up with projects and putting costs on those projects. So this is kind of what we end up. This is out in East Nashville, and you can see, it's hard to see, but there's some yellow, which is existing infrastructure. And in this particular case, we said, well, okay, if we want to make this better and reduce flooding, we need to put in the blue pipes. The blue pipes is what we would need to put in, and obviously there's a cost for that. And we also looked at, well, could we put detention in? Could we hold the water, in certain areas and not have to put pipes in? Just create some green space. Some of these buyout properties that we've already got. Can we use some of those? And so, and again, some of that's not feasible. But when it just boils down to we have different options, and we put all that together. And so then we start seeing okay, the red dots are some very good projects that we've got identified, and we eventually start doing those. So that's about it. So it's about it with that. So the master plan is underway. We're coming up with projects. We hope to build in some of those projects. And again, at the end of the day, we're going to have a county-wide, this is how big ticket item is, and then what kind of funding do we need, and how are we going to get there? So that's kind of it. Okay, so to change the course just a little bit more, so this is what we do with our staff. This is stormwater maintenance. Okay, so there's 136 positions or something like that in stormwater. About 2/3 of those are our maintenance division, and it's people who do nothing all day long other than fix stormwater problems. They're cleaning out ditches, they're replacing driveway pipes, they're responding to customer issues, we're investigating service requests. So these are the kind of things we do. This is kind of outside. We always, when we're doing maintenance ourselves, the first thing we've got to say is this my problem? Is it a problem, and is it the city's problem? A lot of what we see are private property issues, and we have to be very careful that we don't spend public funds on private infrastructure, and it would be improving private property. We can't improve private property with this program. So is it a problem? Is it our problem? Do we have the right to fix it? Should we fix it? And that's kind of where we are in that. And we just poured out a couple little examples. This happened to be a bus stop that had some flooding along the road, and simple fix is put in a pipe. Some of the projects get a little bigger. This is one we're over in Belmont, Lipscomb area, where you can see how close those houses were, and there's just a tiny little ditch going between those houses. And in order to fix it, it was a pretty big project. And we don't really like to put in rock walls and stone, concrete, but in this particular case, that's all we could do to get through there. But it was a pretty good project. And again, you can see what was happening. You can't even see where the road is in the first picture. Okay. So that is where I am. Turning to Rebecca for the next part. Do you have any questions for me at this point? Okay.
Another question about the community input. So when you're deciding on your plans, especially since it's from tax revenue from the entire city, I saw you had a social vulnerability index. Is there also like a community input process of saying communities and neighborhoods maybe that you don't know about can request upgrades?
Yeah, so obviously we know what we know about problems from past experiences. And nowadays, everybody has a cell phone, everybody has, and so I would say that majority of our issues that are brought to our attention now by the community, by the citizens. And so typically, if we start seeing stuff coming together where, there seems to be a lot of stuff going on over here, we'll give the council member, and we'll have a public meeting. So that really helps. And then when you get into a public meeting, we may go in there and say, okay, this is what we know about this community, and there's stuff that we missed. And those are very valuable because it's like, okay, well, you're not here last time it rained, and here's what happened over here, and then we have to amend our project, that kind of stuff. So that is a very valuable process that we go through. And what I tell folks all the time too is the first thing I have to do is get the project identified and give it to one of our consultant engineers to get it under design. And then we can talk about, going on to the next phase of getting it funded in our 6-year capital plan and that kind of stuff. So we do get a lot of community input. Okay.
Walk away quickly, Tom. So I have about 3 minutes.
You've got, I would say, 15, 20 minutes.
Okay. I will go quickly, and now we're getting on to the really exciting stuff, regulations. Tom touched on it a little bit, but a lot of what he talked about is what we do about the stuff in the city that is already there, is already flooding. I'm going to talk a bit about what we do for our new residential developments, commercial and industrial developments, and how we regulate those to help make sure they don't flood. So after the 2010 flood, we were asked by council to look at our stormwater regulations to see how good they are compared across the country. And it turns out we had really, really strong regulations. As Tom mentioned, our residential is 4 foot above base flood elevation. And when you say base flood, we used to always say the 100-year. We're not supposed to say that anymore, even though we're probably going to say it a lot. But it is the flood having a 1% chance of being equaled or exceeded in any given year. So that's probably a better way to describe what our 100-year floodplain is. So non-residential, it's 1 foot above. We do what is called balancing, cut, and fill in the floodplain. And this is where it does get a little bit confusing because the floodplain is an elevation. So somebody will look at a map and you'll see an extent of an area that says it's floodplain, and then you'll see all these houses go there. Well, they're elevating outside of the floodplain, but when they do that, they have to grab some fill from another area in the floodplain and stick it where their house is so that you kind of balance how much flood water is in that area. But unfortunately, when you put development in the floodplain, you take away some of its ecological function. And we like to say sponginess. is one of the things we look for in our floodplain. So when we do allow those developments in the floodplain, we do kind of reduce the benefits that the floodplain can provide to us. One of the regulations we also have is if there is an undeveloped floodplain, you are required to preserve 50% of it. It's pretty loose what can be developed. Like you could have one house, you know, in a large area on a parcel, and that will count as development. So that area isn't preserved. It's kind of hard for you guys to see, but well, here, I'll see if I can use a little pointer. Can you guys see my pointer? Hold on. Nope. Well, anyway, so we do also have floodway regulations. Floodways, we don't want anything there. We don't want you to build anything new there. We try to keep you out. But then, of course, as soon as we said you can do nothing in the floodway, we started having code come through that would let you do little things in the floodway. So you can have trails, parking, water-related structures such as docks and bridges, also athletic fields. Here you can see there are some sports fields in the purple area, so that is an okay use for us in the floodway. But mainly, we just want you to stay out of it. It's the area of active flood during the 100-year storm, during the storm that has the 1% chance of occurrence in a year. And so we really don't want people in our floodways. All right, we also have regulations for what you can do water quality wise, what the water has to be like when you develop or you significantly redevelop a site and it runs off. So our post-construction stormwater quality requirements is something called low impact development. So low impact development is a design methodology that attempts to mimic a site's natural hydrology, and that water can infiltrate, or you hold the water on the site as you would naturally through a cistern, or you have plants that can evapotranspire it to the environment. So that's bioretention areas. If you've seen those kind of depressed areas, maybe in parking lots that water drain to with plants, cisterns, pervious pavers, green roofs, but we do have waivers available from this requirement for site limitations. Anybody who has driven on any of our highways can see we have a lot of shallow bedrock, and rock isn't very good at infiltrating water. So for sites that have shallow bedrock, we do a lot of times give them, if they can't do a cistern or a green roof, we give them a waiver from our requirement. Now, you aren't off the hook entirely. You still have to meet what is called 80% TSS, or total suspended solid removal. So the water does have to be cleaned before it does leave your site. And so those are detention ponds you'll see a lot, and sometimes water quality units, which you don't see, which are kind of filters that are underground to clean that water. We also have, yes?
Are trees included?
Councilmember Allen, will you turn your microphone on? Sorry.
Thank you. Are trees included in the low impact development category?
Yes, we have, in our low impact development, it's volume 5 of our stormwater management manual. So you can do reforestation and you get credit for water quality for that. You can also preserve an area that's forested, and that will give you credit for water quality in another area. And if you install what is called a level 2 bioretention, which gives you your full water quality credit, you have to put trees into that area. We also have community water quality buffers. We have community waters, just like there are waters of the state and waters of the U.S. or WOTUS. Let's just say WOTUS changes when the administration sometimes changes, so we like having community waters that we can decide how to protect, and so that's areas that you cannot develop adjacent to our streams, ponds, and wetlands. All right, we do have more regulations for the quantity of water that comes off of a development site. First of all, we want to make sure anybody, when they're developing, has adequate stormwater management systems. So we do require them to use certain design storms for their minor systems, and those are the systems you can think about, like the initial catch basins and inlets and small pipes, and the minor systems drain to the major systems, which you look at like the larger conveyances, big structures under bridges. So the minor systems, we want you to, yes.
I knew that. Thanks. Anyway, it's been a long day. I'm curious about neighborhoods that were built before we developed this set of regulations. So what about legacy PUDs and things like that, that some of which I've seen don't really have anything in place?
Yeah, so many of our neighborhoods, we have those large lots and one small ranch house on them. And the systems that were built to handle the stormwater back then don't handle when somebody comes in and builds 5 tall skinnies and adds all that imperviousness. So that's some of the stuff we're trying to work at with that stormwater master planning, to try to figure out what pipes are there, I believe that the master plan is gonna look at full build-out conditions, like what happens if all these additional houses go into these neighborhoods, and what kind of infrastructure would be required for that.
Okay, as you guys are doing that, do you want information on things that we see around the city?
Yes, please.
Okay, excellent.
Or
Get
maybe-
ready.
Tom, do you want that information? But anyway, so we have control over new development, and we do want to make sure those systems are adequate. One thing, that we also regulate is how water flows off of a site. So what we say is that we want the pre-development rate of flow from a site to equal the post-development. And this is rate of flow, not volume. So I have this fun little graphic up here. Let me see. So pre-development, we have this like little curve right here. And over here on the y-axis, you have your rate of discharge, and over here is the time of discharge. So it rains, water runs off the site, you don't get that much. But then you come in and you pave a huge chunk of the site. So you get a curve that looks like this. Water comes off of it really quickly. And the more important thing to note is the area under this curve represents the volume of water. So when you develop a site, you are always going to end up with more volume of water leaving the site. This is when you're developing a greenfield site. If it's already pre-developed, already paved, that doesn't really work. So what we do on those sites is we want your pre-development discharge and your post-development discharge rate to be the same. So if you add detention to a site, you get a curve that looks like this. So the rate of discharge is the same, but once again, we talk about the volume is under the curve, you have more water running. And so you're always gonna have more water coming to our systems, and we try to make sure the water running off a site isn't going any more rapidly, but you add more imperviousness, you're always going to end up with more volume, and there's really, unless you want to capture all the volume and truck it somewhere else, there's really not much you can do for those. So we also require downstream infrastructure analysis. If a site is going in, we want you to make sure you look a little bit downstream to make sure you're not going to overwhelm our stormwater systems. Now for the best part of our stormwater department. I mean, the flood buyouts were great, and we love them dearly. But we now have trees. So urban forestry at Metro, briefly, we had the Green Ribbon Committee, goal of becoming the greenest city in the Southeast. It went on to Livable Nashville. We had those goals, Sustainability Advisory Committee, but everybody talks about trees. We want trees, we want urban forestry department. So we went there. The Bloomberg Associates out of New York City came down to help us out with our Livable Nashville goals. And one of the things we developed was the Root Nashville campaign. And this is a public-private partnership to plant 500,000 trees by the year 2050, which works out to be about 16,000 trees a year, which is a lot of trees. The Common River Compact is our operational partner in it. They help do the stuff on private properties, and they also give sub-grants to other agencies. And we've gotten 50,000 trees. We just planted 50,000 this fall.
On a floodplain buyout property.
On a flood, thank you for the full circle there, Kendra.
And in my neighborhood, yay.
Yes. With a park and a greenway, we just hit everything we could with that one. So Executive Order 40, Bloomberg helped us write, which became Executive Order 5, which was the Metro Tree Policy, which was now codified in 2.226. So basically, it recognizes tree canopy as a utility in our city. It should be managed like an asset, like our other utilities, and it also recognizes the benefits that trees provide to us. It established the Tree Working Group. For those of you who have paid attention to trees in Nashville for years, we've been pretty siloed. So this is an opportunity for Metro departments involving trees to get together once a month to talk about trees, because we love to talk about trees. And then it also put in there that Metro should lead by example. We have a 20% higher planting requirement for trees than private development does. And if we remove trees on a site that doesn't have to do with like a development project, we have to count those trees and make sure we install replacements, which we don't make private development do either. It placed the responsibility for urban forestry coordination with Metro Water Services. So some people are like, why are trees at water? Well, because trees are some of our best management practices for rain. I have this like lovely little graphic from the EPA that I see in so many presentations, but trees catch the rain as it's falling. They help infiltrate the water into the soil. They evapotranspire the water back up to the atmosphere. So they are basically cheap stormwater best management practices that we can have out there working for us. So we have a great arborist who works for us, who retired from the U.S. Forestry Department to come plant trees with us. But he did a calculation of all the trees in our right-of-way and our inventory to figure out what they are doing for us work-wise. And so they intercept and transpire millions of gallons of water for us each year. And we put this picture up because it's fun to see, like, they're like detention ponds in the sky almost. In some places, if you don't have too much rain, it doesn't even hit the ground. So we love having trees next to impervious surfaces. And we did a study with the benefits of trees with a calculator. And for every $1 we spend on urban forestry in the right-of-way, the city gets back $3 in return. So what else do we do at Metro Water with trees? Well, we keep a tree inventory in the right-of-way in the denser part of the cities. We update that with species, the condition of the trees, and the size of the trees. We also have an urban tree canopy study. We need to do that every 5 years. And that's a measure of the canopy that's covering the whole city. We plant trees. We plant all the trees we can. Here's a history of the tree planting since we started doing urban forestry at Metro Water Services. We also keep track of who refuses trees, not who refuses trees. We don't shame them or anything, but we were really surprised that a lot of people did not want a tree planted in the right-of-way next to their property. In Madison, one of our first years out there, 32% of the people said, do not plant a tree here. We weren't prepared for that. People don't like leaves, they don't like the maintenance, they like their big expansive lawns. So we are going to be working to get more public education and outreach as to why trees are awesome and you should want them. We also do tree maintenance in the right-of-way. Our trees had never been maintained in the right-of-way. It was only ever reactive. And so we have 2 different cycles. We have outside downtown on snow routes, and then we see every tree downtown every 4 years and see what kind of maintenance it needs. So this year, we are trying to plant 3,200 trees. Our Metro Water Services tree planting budget, as Tom mentioned, we aren't supposed to be improving private property, and also the tree bank, which is a fund that developers pay into when they can't meet their tree planting requirements on their development sites. And we also administer that fund. So we have to use public properties for our planting. So we love planting on schools. Here's a picture of, I think it's a Stratford STEM Magnet Middle. We did a planting there, and the science classes adopted trees, and they named the trees, and they're helping us care for the trees. And so we also plant on our buyout properties. Tom keeps buying properties and tearing out homes so I can plant trees, which is really nice of him. We love planting in the right-of-way, and we also do state and federal properties. Now, the bigger item here is that 94% of the land in Metro is private. So the most impact we could have for any tree planting campaign is to plant on those private properties. And so that's why we have the Cumberland River Compact as our nonprofit partner. And we do fund that private property planting from the general fund. And it's supposed to be up to $2.5 million a year. We haven't gotten there. But because of that, we want to move that funding to the Stormwater Department so that we have consistent funding every year. We aren't going up against the Barnes Fund or anybody else, to try to get that money for trees, just because trees are always going to be so important to the Stormwater Department. So when Tom goes to council and wants more money for the stormwater user fee, know that some of that is also going to fund our tree planting programs. All right, I'm done. Do you have any questions?
Of course we have questions. Again, super, super helpful. I'm curious, you said we compared quite well in terms of our stormwater regulations with other cities. I'm curious the status of how we compare in our tree canopy at this point and the trajectory that we're on and how that compares. And I have several questions. I'll just add one other little one and let everyone else go. But you mentioned the tree bank when developers can't put the trees on their property. I'm curious how often that occurs, and is it really usually because of topography and rock, or are there other exceptions to not having to put trees?
So first question, our canopy was 52%, and when you compare that to other cities, we are doing great. However, we are a combined municipality, so we have really rural areas and really dense areas, and so we can't compare ourselves to other cities that are just that small urban area. So when we look at our 14 planning sub areas, 9 of them are not meeting canopy goals, And so we have a lot of work to do, and we have looked at areas that are actively undergoing development, and those have lost acres of canopy through the years. So if you look at the number, it's like 52% mission accomplished, but then if you dig down deeper into the study, it doesn't necessarily show that. As far as, you asked about our regulations?
Yeah, I was just curious how often developers can't meet whatever the tree requirements are. I'm curious what the tree requirements are currently.
So, so right now it's tree density units. So it's 22 tree density units per acre, and a tree density unit, one tree density unit equals 2 2-inch trees. So you're looking at about 44 trees per acre. Not a lot. The tree bank has collected about $1.7 million since we started managing it. I think that legislation went through in about 2019. So we've had some really large payments into it from sites that just did not want to meet their TDU because they didn't want to subdivide their parcel. Ferrari was one of them. Nashville Wire was one of them. So they paid probably almost $300,000 in together to the tree bank.
So it's optional, essentially, like either you plant the trees or you pay, but it's, okay.
Yeah, but most of our money comes from development sites that just can't get to that 22 TDU. So Stephen Kivett, the urban forester at Codes, he reviews the plans. He makes sure that you can probably put some more trees there, because we would rather have the trees go on the development sites than end up paying into the tree bank. But the money keeps coming in, so it's a great resource for us to use, and also a lot of our nonprofit partners apply to us for using it as well to plant.
Well, I have another question, but I'm mindful of time, so.
I'll ask one of them and then back to you. Can you talk a little bit about the stormwater study that's been done for Councilmember Tom Druffel, and hopefully incentives that we may be able to put in place? Again, going back to the value of trees in terms of, like you said, detention in the sky, which I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And where we are in that process, and how much more input possibility there's for that.
Right, so, and I may kick some of this to Tom, but so there was a stormwater study that the planning department paid for, where looked at complaints that have come in, issues with stormwater, maybe some changes that we can make. And the phase 1 of the stormwater study didn't really turn up anything, we should change this and it will make things better. So they moved on to maybe doing a second phase of the study, which was going to be $300,000. So we thought, well, instead of, spending $300,000, why don't we sit down and look at a few things that we could maybe improve. And one of the things that we did look at is we have a tree credit for single family residential infill. It is based off of Portland's tree credit, and the idea is that we want to give people credit for leaving existing canopy on their development sites and reduce the amount of stormwater treatment they had to do. It was not very popular, mainly because you didn't get much credit and you lose such a huge chunk of buildable area when you protect a large tree to its drip line. So if you want to, develop a half acre, go put, 4 or 5 units on there, but you're trying to save this big tree, you lose so much of your buildable space. So that's one of the reasons we don't think many people were using it. So reached back out to Portland. It turns out they've stopped using it. But we said, that's okay, we're gonna do it anyway. So we have revamped the tree credit, and right now we're making it so that you can not do a stormwater control measure if you are adding less than 1,000 square feet of additional imperviousness and you save a certain amount of trees to the drip line. And this is only existing trees, because young trees, we do love them so, but they really don't provide a lot of benefits when it comes to stormwater. So that's going to be moving forward. It doesn't require a code change because it's in our stormwater management manual, so we would just be able to go in and swap out that tree credit in there. And so hopefully more people will like it.
Great, I'm excited that's happening.
Yes.
In terms of where you plant the trees, is there any mapping to the urban heat map?
So when we started Route Nashville, we came up with impact areas, and the impact areas were a layering of daytime Landsat temperatures, so heat island, vulnerable communities, areas with low canopy, and areas where they had stormwater runoff issues. So that gave us 3 impact areas, which was North Nashville, South Nashville, and Madison. But we're going back through and revisiting that again to try to, well, one, the data needs to be updated. I think it was probably 2018 data that we used, but to see maybe if we need to shift where our impact areas are. Going once. Oh,
I'll ask a question.
okay.
Is there any sustainability policy around how the trees are sourced?
No. That is a great question. Right now, we are running up against, because we are planting so many trees and our partners are planting so many trees, we're running out of trees of a certain size to plant. So we're hoping that most of the nurseries are in McMinnville. So that is a larger distance, sustainability-wise, a larger carbon footprint to get those trees to us. We're hoping one day, we've talked to TSU about maybe using some of their ag campus as a potential nursery area, but we haven't built that out yet, but it's something we should work on. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Rebecca. That was so informative, really helpful. You touched on a number of areas. So one of the ways we started when we reconvened this group post the Cooper administration Sustainability Advisory Committee was we spent an entire meeting actually talking and discussing topics of interest. And so we, I think, checked at least 3 items off our list of topics to touch on today. So really appreciate you all taking the time to be with us today. And I'm happy to aggregate any follow-up questions you all have. I did take a few notes on some things that maybe might be helpful to share with this group. And so I'm happy to facilitate getting information back and forth. So next we're going to transition to revisiting potential Sustainability Advisory Committee support areas. And so if you'll recall, we met virtually back in November and talked through some potential ideas for how the Sustainability Advisory Committee could support Metro's initiatives, both things that Metro departments are doing, but also initiatives that might better support the sustainability of the community. And so I wanted to quickly summarize what we heard during that meeting and talk through that here and make sure that I am not leaving anything out on our list. We heard a lot of great feedback. First and foremost, we need to focus on implementation of plans, but also understand that there's a need to prioritize specific strategies within those plans. And one of the specific ideas that came out of that is a communication to you all of top 10 priorities for sustainability and resilience in Nashville. And that's something we can create. I don't have that here for you today. One of the things that's happening is as the O'Connell administration transitions into its 2nd year, we're doing an analysis of what the administration's priorities are. Now that transit is sort of off and running to the races, what do our priorities look like? And so I want to make sure that we're aligning with whatever those high-level administration priorities might be and appropriately tiering sustainability and resilience in. Also heard feedback and ideas that there's opportunity for this group to help start and activate a lot of the planning that could be done on topics that Metro currently lacks resources to address. So trying to fill in gaps a little bit as to where Metro can't spend that time today. There was the idea shared for subcommittees on administration priority areas. That those subcommittees could be formed by individuals here on this committee on a voluntary basis, and again, organize around a few key areas where we need some additional support. Identification of funding resources, I think, is a great evergreen opportunity. I'm always happy to consider whether it be a philanthropic source of funds or a federal grant or a state grant or anything else in between for any of our sustainability work. There was also interest in assigning the committee with oversight and or tracking of compliance on key policies. Also an idea for issue mapping to better identify connections between sustainability topics, Metro departments, and Nashville partners. I think what I like about this one is that there are a variety of ways that this could be a benefit. Number one is better identifying for our own metro departments how such a highly interdisciplinary topic connects to their work. As you all are seeing, we've had various different individuals come from departments, all topics very related to sustainability and resilience, but not housed within one key department. So it would be helpful there for an intergovernmental collaborative perspective, but also then mapping that back to Nashville partners and external stakeholders. So kind of building out this web of potential connections and alignment opportunities for work. Leveraging public-private partnerships to further sustainability, and specifically a focus on figuring out how we can also tap into philanthropic investments for sustainability. And then the last area, a lot of conversation around community education and engagement on sustainability topics. Some of that could be tailored to look specifically at businesses in the private sector. Some of that could connect specifically with neighborhood associations. And then another angle you could take on that is obviously a topic-specific angle, and some ideas shared during the meeting were food waste reduction goal road mapping, waste reduction strategies generally, and then hazard mitigation. And that's obviously not an exhaustive list, but just wanted to summarize some of the ideas that were shared. So all really great ideas. I think any of these could be possible. Some are probably better suited for long-term, others are better for short-term. And so I wanted to share with you today 3 specific early opportunities that from my perspective are ripe for support from this group. One of them I actually just learned about yesterday, and that is a sustainability conference that is being convened and organized currently by Neighbor to Neighbor, but also Metro's Beautification and Environment Commission. And so I actually presented to them yesterday, and they had expressed an interest because they are organized on a district level in organizing an opportunity to convene a series of workshops during a half day in April on sustainability and resilience topics. Their focus and sort of interest areas right now are on things like tree planting, or thinking about how you might create your own bioswale, things of that nature. But in speaking with them yesterday, they would be very open to partnering with this committee and potentially broadening the focus of that. The intention that they shared with me is to partner with Urban Green Lab to help execute that. But I think it could be a really great foundation for collaboration between these 2 metro bodies, but also create some great resources that then could be used into the future. So that's one opportunity. Again, I just learned about that yesterday, and there seems to be a willingness to collaborate with this body if that's of interest. The second idea is going through a series of steps that would help us develop kind of a residential action plan that would help support sustainability and resilience. And so this is an idea that Jennifer and I were talking about even as recently as today. But we realized that there's a whole slew of educational resources that exist out there somewhere that have either been developed or curated by Metro entities, or even maybe our local partners, local nonprofits, that speak about the topics of sustainability and resilience. We don't necessarily have a great idea of where they are, where they exist, how current they are. But also we don't know what topics we don't have resources on. So this would be a series of steps to help build up to what could collectively be viewed as a compendium of resources that are targeted towards residences or community members. So an inventory of what's currently available, where it lives, again, what's its vintage, then identification of gaps and topics that might warrant development of educational resources, and then a recommendation as to how you could package those comprehensively and share those with the public in a way that's meaningful. So there's, I think, a lot of connections between the Sustainability Conference and this second action plan area, but I think something that I heard when I was going back and reviewing the feedback from the November 13th meeting was there seems to be a lot of activity happening across Metro departments. Maybe as a body, the real opportunity area is extending some of that work to the public and interfacing with the public. I also heard that there was a lot of interest in policy recommendations that should be considered either by the mayor's office, Metro as a whole, individual departments, different oversight bodies. And so I also think there is plenty of room to look at our existing sustainability and resilience plans, and I mean that very liberally, so not specifically just the climate action plan or the climate adaptation and resilience plan, but any plan that you all would interpret as being related to sustainability and resilience topics, and coming up with a list of, from y'all's perspective, the top policy recommendations that we really need to activate and pursue. I think that strikes the right balance of not planning for planning's sake or engaging in another planning exercise, but trying to take the existing plans on the book and really lift up some of the things that we haven't done yet for consideration by Metro. So I'd love some feedback from you all on those items. Again, these are just the early opportunities that I feel like I've had sufficient conversations with folks to bring to you all today, but that doesn't mean that those are the only things that this group could focus on. And y'all can also think on it. So, Stephanie.
Well, I know you said we were going to talk about sort of the implications of changes at the federal level. And so I'm just curious how that changes anything. Specifically, I was wondering about some of the resilience hubs or some of the priorities that may be contingent on federal funding, but I'm just curious if, pending those changes, if there's new priorities for us to figure out.
At this point, based on what we know, I don't know that there are new priorities. I think there is absolutely a reframing of how we talk about the work that we're doing, and there might not be as much public exposure and celebration of successes in sort of a grand way. Just trying to recognize the sensitivities and not necessarily wanting to draw too much attention to what we're doing and kind of have a backlash effect either at the federal level or potentially the state level. And so I don't know that it's going to change priorities. I do think it's going to change framing, but also how much we talk about that externally, or perhaps who we talk about it to externally. Is that helpful?
Yeah, and I was actually thinking more specifically about money from the federal government, just because I know on the previous slide there was a piece about identifying other funding sources and just how much of the plans or priorities were contingent on federal funding that may not be coming.
So I will tell you that it's a little challenging to answer that in many ways. I will tell you work that was being led directly from the mayor's office. I don't know that we ever felt like we had guaranteed funding for any of that work. All of our applications were applications that went in. They had not been even awarded, nor even really reviewed to our knowledge. And so I think it's likely that any specific scopes of work that we applied for funding for are not going to be funded. However, you still have a great grant application and package that then you could use to seek other federal funding sources. We do have, and we're kind of jumping ahead, so I'll just jump ahead to that slide, and then we can go back. There are a handful of grants that we had been awarded, but we're not under contract, and so we're obviously closely watching those and following up with those federal funding agencies, just to make sure that, again, we're still on their radar screen, but right now we don't have answers because there's a lot of...
Is that a lot of funding or a little funding?
So again, I think this is challenging to answer because I don't know that I personally necessarily would be in the loop on all individual projects. What I can tell you is that if you look across Metro, I've actually got these numbers here in front of me. Our finance department has been proactively looking at grants that are received. If you look at just Metro minus any funding received by MNPS or FEMA, we receive about $70 million in federal grants or federal pass-through dollars from the state annually. If you do include MNPS and FEMA, that number jumps to $400 million. So I think what I want to say though is because federal funding is not necessarily administered as one big sustainability bucket, in terms of understanding how it impacts this work directly, that's a difficult question to answer. I know there are two grants, again, that one funding a transportation project and another funding EV infrastructure that, again, were awarded but not under contract. Everything else was either in the we've applied for it, but we haven't been awarded any funds, or it is under contract. So. It was NDOT General Services. Yeah, it's a joint project. Other questions? We're watching, learning, don't have a ton of information at this point, and Linda, I'm sure you're more on top of this than just about anyone in that there are a variety of injunctions at play and legal decisions, and there's actually a great segment of, I guess, the February 3rd Metro Council Budget and Finance Committee meeting where Law Director Wally Dietz, I wrote it down, he says, this is unprecedented action at the federal level. It's impossible for Metro to predict how long it will continue. There could be years of contentious litigation. So just know that this is constantly evolving, and our goal is obviously continuity of service. But as it relates to this work, I think it changes, again, how it's funded. I don't know that it changes any of the work itself. Okay. One other item I'll share with you that we recently went through with our climate working group, which is a group of metro agencies that touch sustainability and resilience topics, was we polled them essentially to say, hey, what sustainability topics do you work on that you think could benefit from community education and engagement? And obviously we don't have time to go through all of those, but shout out to Jennifer Westerholm and her amazing intern, Nora, for helping us actually document all of this. But you can see there are a lot of ideas that Metro departments believe this committee could sort of help arrange events perhaps, or host events that could better educate our public. And again, a lot of topics we talked about today or topics that we have addressed in prior meetings. So wanted to share that initial list with you all. Again, it doesn't mean that this group has to facilitate or host any community engagement and education events, but wanted to share with you that there's definitely a sense that the need is there.
Can I just mention on this and one of the other options that that you had outlined is I just want to encourage us to be thinking really hard about how we communicate, because it's one thing to have the resources. It's another thing to actually disseminate them in an effective way and to really engage people. And I think we're learning more and more from the behavioral sciences about how people process information, and we have changing technology about how people are. So I just want to encourage not business as usual. And I know General Services is thinking about this, and that might actually be a really interesting topic to discuss at a future meeting. But I just wanted to flag that because, you know, I have existential angst sometime about all of the wonderful resources that we have created that I feel like aren't somehow getting the traction I would, you know, hope. So.
That's a great point. Joe?
Yeah, that's a really great point. Thank you for bringing that up, because earlier I saw inventory of education materials, and here's a long list of education community engagement opportunities. I mean, what can you give us some examples of what that looks like in practice? When you're going out and trying to educate the community about, hard to recycle objects or anything like that.
So I think that would be pretty flexible and open to advisement from this committee. I'll share examples of perhaps how this has been done in the past. It could be organizing a panel on a particular topic and inviting different subject matter experts to share different perspectives on a topic. It could be as simple as perhaps participating in like Nashville's Earth Day Festival and potentially hosting a booth. So I think we would be pretty open to this group's recommendation as to what the appropriate format is. Maybe it's a webinar, maybe it's creating one-pagers. So one idea that was shared last night during the Beautification and Environment Commission meeting was a particular district commissioner had taken it upon herself to create one-pagers, simple one-pagers and almost flyers in Canva that highlighted simple changes you could make at home that could be shared on social media that would then be distributed to her council district to help make small changes at home. So I think it really runs the gamut as to what that engagement could look like, but obviously I think we would all want that to be effective.
So there's that list of early opportunities. Are you thinking of those as just kind of a short-term project? And then the first slide would then maybe be longer-term projects? I'm also thinking about people we've had presentations from, like the Titans and the East Bank. Is there a role for us to kind of stay side to side with them there on what they're doing sustainability-wise?
I think we absolutely could. And I think my goal here with this longer list was to try to summarize everything that was shared in a list. I think there are ways we could do any of these particular scopes or activity areas. I think we'd have to spend more time defining them and figuring out roles and responsibilities and sort of what's within bounds or out of bounds. What does timeline look like? Who are our key collaborators? But these early opportunities are really immediate areas where I think we could kind of quickly activate and start working on things today. It doesn't mean that any of these are off the table. I think if you all want to tackle any of those, we can. We just probably need to put more pen to paper. And as it relates to kind of alignments and checking back in with others who have presented, I absolutely think we can do that. We should probably have conversations to say what's the appropriate medium or mechanism to do that. Is that inviting them back to a meeting to give an update? Is it me requesting an update and then sharing that back with you all? And I think we also need to probably consider reasonable amounts of time between when they presented and when we would think we'd actually see change in implementation. And I'm sure they would give us that feedback as well if, for example, we invited somebody back to present an update and they felt like it hadn't been sufficient time for them to accomplish something significant or of substance. But I think we can absolutely do that. Stephanie?
I guess two thoughts. One, I think obviously you, especially your office, extremely busy, so don't want to ask you to sort of have to organize us into things. I'd be curious for if we could all just follow up with you over email or something about what it is that of this long list that we would do outside of these meetings as a way just to gauge sort of interest or whatever. And I think particularly, I like the idea of the subcommittee to be able to really dig in outside of these meetings if there is something, whether that was a community engagement subcommittee or a fundraising or funding sources or something like that. But so for us all to just think about what are the areas of work that we're particularly interested in or the kind of work that we would like to do outside of these meetings, and then you might be able to have kind of an assessment of what would make the most sense versus you repackaging this for us.
That sounds great. And one additional area I actually had conversations about today but didn't think to bring it to this group, but it's actually a really wonderful opportunity for this group. We, about a year and a half ago, had created a environmental indicators dashboard. It has not been maintained in the way it needs to be, and I take complete ownership for that. But I think an area for this group to provide feedback is advising us on some performance metrics to share with the public. So if we were to refresh that dashboard, what are the 5 to 10 metrics that are really important to communicate to the public? We have, since the time we created that dashboard, are kind of, from an enterprise perspective, shifting to Tableau, and so there's a logical time. We're also rolling out some performance metrics work with our different departments, and so it's a very logical time to go back to departments and make that ask. But I'd also love feedback from you all as to what metrics does the public care about? And should we be tracking if we're measuring performance across the city on key sustainability and resilience areas?
So just to recap, so do you want us to each send you
Sure.
the things that we're
Yep.
most interested in?
Yep.
And like a rough estimate of what role or how much time we could put in? Like, I'm trying to think what are the operative, and then the idea is you might develop some subcommittees for us. Got it. That seems like an efficient way to do it.
Okay.
I'm curious, you haven't mentioned the Bloomberg Innovation Team?
Yes.
And I was just wondering if there was a role for us in that possibly.
I think there absolutely can be a role. I'll share with you, we've run into some roadblocks in that we had, our civic designer, which is the second of 3 positions, we had essentially hired somebody, and shortly before their start date, they ended up backing out of the position due to some family circumstances and challenges. Very warranted, but what it means is some of our innovation work has been placed on hold until we can get that civic designer in their seat. We're actually actively recruiting for that position right now, so I'm happy to share with this group the position description, and if you can get it out to your networks, that would be very appreciated. One of the groups that will be convened as part of the Bloomberg American Sustainable Cities program is what's called our partnership table. And the partnership table, from a Bloomberg perspective, they're looking for 3 community-based organizations that are Black, minority-led, or serving, that do work at the nexus of climate change and racial wealth equity. We collaborated with Bloomberg and PolicyLink to select those. And so we have selected 3 organizations to partner with us on that partnership table. We haven't done a lot of external engagement on that topic, but for your working knowledge and awareness, it's the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee, and specifically the Village, that's overseen by Erica Burnett, Stand Up Nashville, and then Recycle Reinvest. So something that I think would be really interesting is to think about how the partnership table also works and receives input from you all and vice versa. The concept of the partnership table and what it will be doing and focusing on is still very much evolving. The level of work that's happening today is high-level issue mapping and identification of potential opportunity areas. We're seeing alignment between some of the concepts that were presented in community change, EPA community change grant applications, and I think I shared with you all some of the ideas that were presented there. They were fairly interdisciplinary, and I think tried to pull in a lot of different opportunity areas. By no means exhaustive, but I think very flexible in nature in terms of how work could be deployed. There's also a lot of interest in looking at cost of living, and so I think one of the easier areas to draw that connection is with energy efficiency and renewable energy. And then obviously, as we know, through the work that's been done the past year on transportation and mobility across the city, that's an early opportunity area. And so I share that with you to say that work is by no means solidified at all. It is very high level. Let's cast a wide net as to where this could go. I think once we have that partnership table convened, they actually haven't even formally met yet as a group. And so once they've convened and have a little bit more direction, and some of this is we're waiting on some additional direction from Bloomberg as to how we're supposed to be spending that group's time. At least from their perspective, we have our idea, but we're trying to sort of make sure that our priorities are represented, but also their intentions are represented. Once they've come together, I do think there's a natural synergy to bring those 2 groups together, or at least have the 2 groups review or engage in each other's work products. Or engage in providing feedback on work products, I should say.
Just on organizing ourselves, I'm wondering if you all want to self-organize just to take some work off of Kendra's plate of having to coordinate us into subcommittees. I'm also thinking it might need another call for us to talk about priorities so that we don't have like 15 different subcommittees with like 2 people each.
because we have 10 minutes, and people could.
We're through. The only other thing I was going to share with you is we also did a poll on who are you most frequently coordinating on these topics. To me, this was just fascinating to hear, what other Metro departments were telling us. And so don't feel like you have to do anything with this. I just thought it would be information that would be helpful to share. For example, you all might know of a great either local or regional or even national organization that we're not actively coordinating with today. Please note this is not exhaustive. This is a group of potentially up to like 45 people. We typically have a little over 30 participate, and so there absolutely are critical players that touch this work who may not have been able to contribute. So I just wanted to share that with you all as well. But yes, that rounds out our slides and planned agenda. And so we don't meet again until May, which sounds crazy to me. So we do have some time as well. So it's a logical time to do some self-organization. I'm happy to help and support with organizing time for you all, if that's helpful. But if you are interested in self-organizing, I am okay with that too.
Whenever I have ideas, I'm always worried that I'm volunteering myself to organize.
Well, Jennifer, which of those do you like the best? Which would you like to do?
So I think the thing that stood out to me is on those early opportunities, bullet points, 2 out of the 3 were about publicizing what is already happening versus the policy one was about working on things that have not happened yet. And I think there's a lot of value in all of them. I'm also curious about what resources we would have, because if we're doing, let's say, like a marketing campaign, let's say we're going to do a bunch of like TikTok posts. I don't know. I don't even have TikTok. Would we need to hire a marketing person to do that for the community? For the first 2, yeah, or especially for the second one, for the community engagement thing. Are we going to have to hire someone to make videos? So I don't know what resources we're going to have and then what output we're going to expect. And I expect that's part of the whole conversation. So I think the policy one and the community engagement one are actually probably like long-term projects because they're really multifaceted.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I was intrigued by the policy one just because so many person hours have gone into Plan to Play, Nashville Next, the mitigation plan, the adaptation and resilience plan. And, but I think that the challenge there, Kendra, would be we would need to very closely develop our criteria for evaluation with you, because we can all pick ones that we like, but we need to have some balance with feasibility and cost, et cetera. But I mean, I suspect we might not come up with anything you haven't thought of already, but then again, you probably haven't had a chance to read all of those plans recently.
Not recently, no.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Oh,
I
you
don't
don't have
have a mic.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine.
Oh.
I was wondering why you're so quiet, Matt.
Well, I mean, it's just, the time of year, getting it from both sides. But I like the idea of starting with policy and scoping out our focus, because there's so many of these other aspects that we talked about as a group, like how can we help identify funding sources? Well, it'd be really helpful to know our policy priorities as a city or as a, sustainability group, to then start thinking about what funding we can support or what our community engagement priorities are centered around. And so I think it kind of, to some extent, unlocks, these other aspects of how we can provide support to you and Metro's, overarching sustainability goals.
I think to the community engagement point, it would be less of us saying, hey, we're going to do this campaign, and more of we're going to take a look at what Metro has available, what the priorities are for community education and engagement, and help advise on them or make connections where necessary, so that, we're making sure we're kind of helping ensure that it is going to be effective, because that's my fear. Like when you started talking about inventory of education resources, I'm sure there's a lot of great material out there. My mind immediately goes to pamphlets and the things I get in my NES bill, and the things that I don't think are particularly effective. And so I think that that's where we would be most helpful on the community engagement side, is not creating, but advising and helping guide according to their priorities. yeah, I mean, what are the priorities? What are the effective ways to do it? Who are the audiences? What connections can we make? You know, from my perspective, as, you know, working for a bank, I feel like we have a pretty good handle on how businesses like to be talked to and what's important to them and what motivates them to action.
Okay. I'll send a follow-up email with slides, and then I'll summarize what I think will be our approach moving forward. You all can send me back your interest and focus areas. I think we're seeing a little bit of consensus around community engagement and some sort of role in advising strategy there, or community education and engagement, but then also looking into some potential policy recommendations based on what's already in plans. Does that sound reasonable? Okay.
Can I just ask a question about the policy? So let's say we come up with a list of recommended policies. What will happen with that list?
Well, I think to Linda's point, I think there's an expectation, or I would recommend that throughout that process of developing that list, we're consulting with one another, and or I might even be pulling in subject matter experts from specific departments that would really need to be on board to move forward with those things. There also might be pieces of policy recommendations that you all are interested in that are actually in flight or relevant to a policy change that's happening in a different area. There's a ton of infrastructure work happening right now that there isn't a day that goes by that I don't learn about another aspect or angle of it that's kind of new and interesting to me, and even in many ways relevant to this work. And so I think there's an expectation that there would have to be coordination before sort of you send over, you know, a draft of recommendations. I think what would make sense with those recommendations is to put it perhaps like in a memo format that is sent to me. It's something I can share with departments. I can also share with the mayor, and then I would defer to our council member representation as to whether or not that's something they would want to share with their fellow council members. So I think there are a couple of different ways it could be shared with larger audiences, and then I think it would be logical to have conversations about which ones are ripe for implementation, which ones are sort of non-starters perhaps, or which ones are maybe longer term priorities. So I think there could be some phasing and sequencing and discussion there.
Okay, great.
Stephanie?
And I guess just in the earlier part of this conversation in my mind, I wasn't only thinking about new policies that we would recommend, but just sort of policy areas, because it seems like there's a lot of programs, even like this buyout program that we just talked about today, where it's, I think, a matter of sort of implementation. So it feels like I wouldn't want to limit ourselves to focusing on new policies that we need, but whatever the priorities are.
I think that's reasonable.
Do people all feel like we want to do another call in like a couple of weeks? Just for me, I like to think about things for a little bit.
No thinking aloud. No thinking aloud, Jennifer.
Personally, I think yes. I've wondered, you know, I was on the last call at 9 place for us to talk. I missed the one before because of a family thing, and I'm like, I feel like there needs to be something in between, you know, to focus in and support and actually bring forward or provide support on, or let's have a call.
Okay. Do you want me to send out, well, I would hate to send out a doodle poll. Do you want me to send out a doodle poll and follow-up email for you all?
Do we want Kendra on the call? I'm just kidding. That was a joke. That was a joke.
Time. Yeah, like I'm happy to do some coordination of a call. Like we can use my Zoom and doodle poll. Yeah.
Just beware that I think if you have two council members in the room at the same time, I think technically you're supposed to public notice the meeting.
Who are two council people?
Council members Allen and Ewing.
Oh.
Talking about business of the council.
Is this business of the council?
Let me seek some legal guidance.
Okay. Okay, and if it's okay for you to give me
Sorry.
everyone's email addresses.
I brought up something I didn't have a specific answer to, which I probably shouldn't have done.
Well, I
But
mean, that's
just
the question.
wanted
If-
you all to be aware.
If we're
that
having an informal meeting, do we need to do public comment and all that kind of stuff too?
I'll get you a specific
Okay.
answer. Thanks. So, okay. All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you. I'm sure I will talk to many of you way in advance of May 29th.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.